Shalom vänner, profetisk uppdatering 15 mars 2024. Det är en helt vanlig dag idag, förutom att det är min födelsedag. Och jag trodde aldrig jag skulle bli så gammal när jag var ung, alltså 60 plus. Då är man jättegammal. Det tyckte man ju då på den tiden. Och nu förstår jag alla som har gått före och som går före så att säga, att man inte fattar riktigt att man är gammal. Man blir gammal. Det är ju kroppen som åldras och bryts ner, men inuti känner man sig som vanligt, fast med mycket mer erfarenheter, förstås, än när man var ung. Och vi läser från andra Korinthierbrevet 4:16. Därför tappar vi inte modet. Även om vår yttre människa bryts ner, förnyas vår inre människa dag för dag. Ty vår nöd som varar ett ögonblick och väger lätt, bereder åt oss på ett oändligt rikt sätt en härlighet som väger tungt och varar i evighet. Vi riktar inte blicken mot det synliga utan mot det osynliga. Ty det synliga är förgängligt, men det osynliga är evigt. Ja, jag är väl inte ensam om att känna att ju äldre man blir, desto mer tacksam blir man för det eviga livet som Jesus ger alla som tar emot hans frälsning och tar emot Jesus. Det här livet är så kort och det går så fort, men vi har en evighet att se fram emot och som vi kan glädjas åt redan nu. Och därför vill vi sprida budskapet, Guds evangelium om Jesus Kristus, så att så många som möjligt tar emot honom. Jeshua, som är hans judiska namn. Jesus Kristus eller Jeshua, Messias. Jag ska berätta om den finaste födelsedagspresenten som jag någonsin har fått. Det är en present som jag alltid bär på. Det är väldigt personligt, men jag hoppas att det kan vara till uppmuntran för någon. Eivor. Och det var ett ovanligt namn. Är det svenskt? Var kommer det ifrån? Är det norskt? Eivor? Nej, jag heter inte Eivor utan Elvor. 2 L? Nej, 1 L. E-L-V-O-R. Jag har naturligtvis fått kommentarerna och frågorna hur många gånger som helst. Och mitt svar är, det var min pappa som hittade på mitt namn. Men det finns en hemlighet bakom. Namnet i sig är egentligen inget speciellt och jag är inget speciellt. Mitt namn är inte mer speciellt än ditt namn och jag är inte mer speciell än du som ser och hör det här. Mitt namn blev speciellt eftersom det berättar om hur vi, i detta fall jag, kan förakta Guds godhet, medvetet eller omedvetet. Guds gåvor. Därför att vi har en fallen natur, en syndanatur som den också kallas i Bibeln och finns fler benämningar, som är fientlig och upprorisk mot Gud och hans vägar för oss. Jag tyckte inte om mitt namn när jag växte upp. Jag hade velat heta ett vanligt namn, helst Maria. Och jag var sur på pappa ibland för att han hade hittat på mitt namn, som ingen annan hette. Och jag tyckte att mitt namn var tråkigt och det lät gammaldags. Lägg märke till det. På gymnasiet fick jag ett smeknamn av en kompis och det blev namnet som jag blev kallad i många år. Med lite olika varianter. Och det var ett ganska fult namn, men det fanns inget elakt i det, tvärtom. Mitt liv och mitt vittnesbörd är som den förlorade sonen i Jesu liknelse. Som så många andra ungdomar som växer upp i kristna familjer, kristna hem och inte förstår att man tackar nej till det absolut bästa och viktigaste i livet och livets själva mening när man gör som den förlorade sonen. Jag fick allt serverat från mina föräldrar. Och jag har alltid haft en stark gudstro, övertygelse. Jag brukar säga att jag kan inte minnas att jag någonsin har tvivlat på att Gud är Gud och att Bibeln är sann. Men överlåtelsen och ödmjukheten inför Guds vilja vill jag inte gå med på. Den saknades. Och jag drog iväg på mina egna vägar långt bort. Citation då, som den förlorade sonen. Som en förlorad dotter. Och av alla kompisar under de åren var det väldigt få som kände till mitt rätta namn. Det var smeknamnet jag blev kallad. Eller smeknamnen. 1989 var jag redo för beslutet. Ja eller nej, antingen eller. Min gudslängtan hade väckts på ett särskilt sätt när jag var på väg hem från arbetet, när jag var i Australien ett halvår. Och Gud hade tidigare visat tydligt när jag bodde i Israel att jag var nära att förlora min tro helt. Nära att förlora relationen med honom helt. Och det skrämde mig. Nu var det allvar. Och jag måste få mitt liv rätt ställt med Gud. Och beslutet gällde 100% till Jesus och det gäller resten av mitt liv. Det var inget känslobeslut överhuvudtaget. Jag var inte ett dugg intresserad av uppväxttidens känsloupplevelser på konferenser eller möteskampanjer. Det hade jag fått nog av. Det var ett mycket konkret och medvetet viljebeslut det handlade om nu. Och jag hade beräknat kostnaden. En nära släkting sa, det trodde jag aldrig. Ändå hade han varit med och bett för mig i alla år. Men då förstår ni lite hur det var ställt med mig. Och tänk på det alla ni som ber för era inom citation då, förlorade söner eller döttrar. För Gud är inget omöjligt. Håll ut i bön och fortsätt be. Bönesvaren kommer. Jag stannade i Sverige för nu var det inte jag som bestämde längre. Ske din vilja var min bön. Och det innebar att jag började få tillbaka mitt eget rätta namn och nya kristna vänner. I församlingen som jag gick med i predikade pastorn en gång om gudsnamnet El på hebreiska. Oj, tänkte jag. El. E-L har ju jag i mitt namn. Så fint. Och jag började tycka om mitt namn. En gång var jag bjuden med nya kompisar, kristna kompisar. Och vi var 4 tjejer. Där minst en av dem hade levt ungefär som jag. Och hon berättade om hur hon hade fått ett smeknamn när hon levde i synd borta från Guds väg. Men när hon vände tillbaka till Jesus då fick hon sitt eget namn och betydelsen av sitt namn. Och det hade en väldigt fin betydelse. Och så började hon kommentera mitt namn. El-Vor. Or betyder ljus på hebreiska. Och det hade jag ju aldrig tänkt på där jag bodde alla år i Israel. Jag var van att säga att jag arbetar för en designer med skinnkläder som också heter Or. Begadim be-or. Jag tror inte jag kan flytande hebreiska, det är långt därifrån. Jag var bortskämd med att alla pratade engelska när jag bodde i, framförallt i Eilat. Och jag kan en hel del ord på hebreiska och enklare fraser. Och jag kunde få vem som helst att tro att jag pratade flytande. Men så fort det gick utanför mitt lilla område var det kört. Ja, när man inte vill prata om det inte är perfekt rätt, då kan man inte lära sig ett språk flytande. Så är det bara. Men, vi lämnar det. Den kvällen med oss 4 tjejer som alla var Israelvänner fick jag veta betydelsen på mitt namn på hebreiska. El-Vor, Gud och ljus. Eller Guds ljus. V, alltså E-L-V-O-R och V kan ju också betyda och på svenska då, utifrån hebreiska. Och sen den dagen älskar jag mitt namn. Det är Jesus som är ljuset, Guds ljus. Vi får vara hans själ som bär ljuset inom oss. Tror ni att jag skämdes över min attityd hela uppväxten mot pappa som hade hittat på mitt namn. Mitt tråkiga namn som lät så gammaldags. Sommaren 1992, alldeles före bibelskolan där Gud förde samman mig och Janne och led oss in i tjänst och sina förberedda gärningar som han hade visat på olika sätt innan, både för Janne där han var och för mig på olika sätt. Så fick jag mitt livs första profetia. Så säger Herren. Av en helt okänd kille som inte kände mig. Mina föräldrar hade talat profetiskt till mig flera gånger. Det förstod jag ju senare, men inte profeterat så här. Så säger Herren, en direkt profetia från Gud. Och i den här profetian bekräftar Gud att det var han som hade gett mig mitt namn. Och detta alltså från en helt okänd person. Och det hände någonting där som blev en inre läkedom på djupet. Och mitt namn blev den vackraste födelsedagspresenten från Jesus själv. Som han då hade gett genom min pappa. Vad vill jag säga med detta? Och det Gud har för oss, det är alltid det bästa. Men det är dolt för oss så länge vi själva vill bestämma och göra som vi vill och leva som vi vill. Gud uppenbarar sin viljas väg när vi böjer oss och väljer att överlåta allt till honom. Det gäller inte minst oss som växte upp i kristna hem. Vi kan ha en självklar tro på Gud, men vi kanske aldrig har gett våra hjärtan helt till honom. Jag hade inte det. Och därför drogs jag till den här världen och vad den har att erbjuda. Jag läser från andra Korinthierbrevet 4, vers 4. Till den här tidsålderns Gud har förblindat de otroende sinnen så att de inte ser ljuset som strålar ut från evangeliet om Kristi härlighet, han som är Guds avbild. Vi predikar inte oss själva, utan Jesus Kristus som Herren, eller Jesus Kristus som JHWH, Jesus Kristus som Gud, och oss som era tjänare för Jesus skull. Till Gud som sa, ljus ska lysa fram ur mörkret, han har låtit ljus lysa upp våra hjärtan, för att kunskapen om Guds härlighet som strålar fram i Kristi ansikte ska sprida sitt sken. Guds väg är inte alltid lätt. Det är den smala vägen och den kan se tråkigast ut av alla. Därför att denna tidsålders Gud, alltså Gud med litet g, alltså Satan, har förblindat våra ögon och sinnen. Men Guds väg är livets väg och välsignelsens väg. Hur smala passagen än är ibland och hur svår vägen än är tidvis, kan ingenting i den här världen ens mätas eller jämföras med det goda som Gud ger och gör. Den här världen har ingenting att erbjuda jämförelse. Och Gud gottgör och han kan gottgöra i överflöd. Guds gåvor och välsignelse fanns redan där, men vi förstod det inte. Vi kunde inte se det för det var dolt för oss. Vår fallna natur, det kötsliga som Bibeln kallar det, eller syndanaturen, gör att vi föraktar Guds viljas väg och hans handlande. Vi föraktar den smala vägen, vi föraktar ödmjukhet och svaghet. I syndanaturen, i vår fallna natur, vill vi höra om självförverkligande, att nå vår högsta potential, makt och rättigheter, att bli något, att nå högre och bli något större, något stort. De som sprider falska läror eller avviker från Guds väg, de brukar förakta och se ner på Guds väg. Den är tråkig och gammaldags för dem. Falska apostlar och profeter serverar alltid något nytt, något större och bättre. än det som Bibeln säger eller vad det gamla evangeliet handlar om. Du blir alltid något större och mer än du trodde. Och det måste du lägga beslag på. Och deras läror slutar förr eller senare alltid i ormens lögn. Ni blir som Gud. Om ni tar emot det jag erbjuder. Höga positioner och titlar, upphöjdhet och makt, tillväxt i mängd, hemlig kunskap och andliga tekniker. Det övernaturliga blir naturligt. Ni blir allt det som världen eftersträvar, för det tillhör er, allt här och nu. Ta bara ut, rikedom, helande, allt du vill. Men det här är falska ljus som slocknar och leder ut i andligt mörker. Deras läror leder till högmod och bygger på kötsliga begär. Efter självupphöjelse, jagets upphöjelse, med hjälp av Jesu namn. Guds väg och hans vilja innebär tvärtom att mista sitt liv, som Jesus sa, för att finna det, genom att ge upp, lägga ner, släppa taget, kapitulera, överlåta åt honom. Låt Gud vara Gud. Låt Jesus vara Herre och Herren, din gode herde. Din gode herde. Då öppnas våra ögon så att vi förstår att Guds gåva är den bästa och vackraste som finns. Jesaja profeterar om kung Kores, som Herren hade utvalt som ett redskap för att befria sitt folk, Israels folk. Vi läser från Jesaja 45, vers 2. Själv ska jag gå framför dig, höjderna ska jag jämna ut, kopparportarna ska jag spränga och järnbommarna ska jag bryta sönder. Jag ska ge dig skatter som är dolda i mörkret och hemliga rikedomar, för att du ska inse att jag är Herren, som kallar dig vid ditt namn, jag, Israels Gud. Ytterst beskriver sammanhanget här och hela profetian Jesus själv som kungars kung, som Messias. Men den här profetian gäller också var och en som tar emot honom, som tror på honom. Herren kallar oss vid namn och han känner ditt namn och han kallar dig vid ditt namn. Och när vi säger ja, då börjar vi förstå att Guds väg och vilja är det bästa som finns. Och vi får vårt rätta värde och vi får upprättelse i Jesus Kristus, Jeshua, Messias. Hans namn är över alla namn och det är namnet Jesus eller Jeshua, som är hans judiska namn, som ska äras och förhärligas och upphöjas. Så skriver Paulus i Filipperbrevet 2 från vers 6. Fastän han var till i Guds gestalt räknade han inte tillvaron som Gud såsom segerbyte, utan utgav sig själv genom att anta en tjänares gestalt då han blev människa. Han som till det yttre var som en människa ödmjukade sig och blev lydig ända till döden, döden på korset. Därför har också Gud upphöjt honom över allting och gett honom namnet över alla namn. Jesus, som betyder frälsning. Så här är texten i en gammal sång som heter Namnet Jesus. Och det känner säkert många igen och jag tycker det är så fantastisk text i den här sången. Namnet Jesus vill jag sjunga, sköna namn som ej förgår. Dig jag vill med frigjord tunga prisa varje dag jag får. Till det unga, till det gamla har det namnet glädjebud. Det kan kalla, det kan samla vilsna barnen hem till Gud. Namnet Jesus, himlens hälsning, det mitt hjärtas kärlek vann. I det namnet fann jag frälsning, inget annat frälsa kan. Namnet Jesus, skönt det klingar, Låt det ljuda runt vår jord. Inget annat världen bringar hopp och tröst som detta ord. För det namnet hatet viker, för det namnet ondskan flyr. I det namnet skall Guds rike bryta fram när dagen gryr. Genom nöden, genom natten lyser härligt Jesu namn. Seglaren på vida vatten leder det till tryggad hamn. Och när sol ej mer ska vara, Jesus namnet lyser än, prisad av en tale skara, prisat högt i himmelen. Och namnet Jesus, det beskriver ju vem Jesus är. Vem han är och vad han har gjort för oss. Ja, jag går vidare här nu till lite uppdateringar om Israel. Och jag vill bara läsa kort här början och slutet från Amir Tsarfatis senaste nyhetsbrev. Shalom från norra Israel. Jag har sagt det förut och jag säger det igen. Min region i världen tar aldrig semester. Detta har blivit desto mer sanning sedan den 7 oktober 2023. De senaste 5 månaderna har resulterat i högre stressnivåer än jag har hanterat på länge, kanske hela mitt liv. Om massakern den där lördagen inte var nog har vi varit i krig med Hamas i 5 månader nu. Dessutom har vi att göra med ett överhängande krig i norr med Hezbollah. Till synes vilken dag som helst nu. Ovanpå båda dessa verkligheter finns det en oändlig kamp med den globala fördomen mot mitt älskade land. Amir syftar såklart på antisemitismen här. Även i denna tragiska tid ser jag Herrens trofasthet. Och ett av de främsta sätten jag ser detta på är genom bevarandet av hans folk, Israel. Han har bevarat oss genom tiderna och han kommer att bevara oss nu. Malaki 3:6. Ty jag är Herren, jag förvandlas inte, därför är ni inte förtärda, Jakobs söner. Och jag läser också från Svenska folkbibeln här, från Malaki 3:6. Jag, Herren, har inte förändrat mig, och ni, Jakobs barn, har inte utplånats. Apostlagärningarna 17:30. Gud har länge haft överseende med okunnighetens tider, men nu befaller han människorna att de alla och överallt skall omvända sig. Ty han har fastställt en dag då han ska döma världen med rättfärdighet, genom den man som han har bestämt till det, sedan han erbjudit tron åt alla genom att uppväcka honom från de döda. I väntan på hans återkomst. Slut citat. I väntan på Jesu återkomst. Gud är trofast Israel och han är trofast oss. Och här kommer nu delar ur en video med 4 vänner som samtalar om tiden vi lever i, teknikens utveckling och hur oerhört snabbt Bibelns profetier kan uppfyllas. Mycket uppfylls redan, mycket är uppfyllt, men det kan gå väldigt fort med det som återstår att uppfyllas innan hans återkomst, innan tidens slut och Jesus kommer tillbaka. Så det här får vi ta del av, det är ganska intressant att höra. Och med det önskar jag Guds välsignelse och Shabbat Shalom.
We're going to try to do. I have a couple others that are scheduled to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're going to we're going to try to go for just 2 hours tonight. One of the reasons I wanted to do this, I've talked to Tom about this a number of times, is when I go to these conferences, I really learn a lot when I speak at a conference. And mainly it's because I'm in the back in the green room talking to the other speakers off topic. And that's very enlightening many times. So what I would like these to do is sort of be like the green room experience brought to you guys on YouTube Live. So we're going to talk about technology tonight. Very hot topic. A lot of things going on. I know Britt and Scott both talk about a lot, as does Tom, and as do I. So Tom is going to moderate for us and tell us when it's time for us to stop talking and ask us some questions. So Tom Hughes from Hope for Our Times, take it away.
Thank you, John. This is going to be a great time, everybody. And I'm going to kick this off with a portion of a news article. Britt, I've shared this with you before. You probably, in fact, you wrote about these things way back then, too. This is from 2018, and this will help set the pace and the direction that we're going. But this was by Matt Ward in 2018. This is the mind-boggling thing. I know all of you guys will get this, but he wrote an article called The Technological Tipping Point. And he wrote this: I've written before about our increasing proximity to the tribulation period. Amazing change is going to occur within just the next half decade. We are now reaching a point in human history where almost everything we do, our habits, our preferences, our biases, down to our associates, families, the properties we live in, all records about us anywhere and everywhere are going to be amalgamated, centralized, and kept forever. Then he said, collectively, we are creating every day more than 2.5 quintillion bytes of new data. That amount is set to rise exponentially over the next decade. So again, this goes all the way back to 2018 when he wrote this. And he continued, mass data technology means that we can never escape from what we have written, posted, emailed, what we have bought, and from where our loans, debts, and paychecks, what we have messaged or WhatsApped. Every single piece of data that exists out there on us can and will soon be brought to bear against us. There's nowhere to hide. The governments of this world won't have to arrest you and bring you in for detailed questioning if you concern them, because the information about you will already be right there, stored and ready for analysis. It will tell them more than they would ever need to know about your motivations, your loves, your loyalties, and ultimately how they can or cannot trust you, or whether you pose a threat to them. I've said it before that the technology revealed in Revelation is the technology of now. It is not technology of circa 2040. The tribulation isn't going to be in 20 years' time. The tribulation is going to be soon, really soon. We're about to reach a technological tipping point, one that nobody on this earth is going to be able to escape from. But you guys are all friends, and I keep going back to that article. 2018, 6 years old, that article is. You guys talk about this all the time. I've asked you questions about these things, and I'm thankful to just be a part of it, be able to ask you questions. So let's just roll, because there are some real big concerns. So we have some questions I was able to write up based on how smart you guys are. So you guys ready?
Sure. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the deal, everybody. Each one of them gets 3 minutes. If they want to go longer, they have to say, please, may I please have one more minute? So these guys like to talk. You guys all know that. So this is going to be fun. All right. Number one, first question out of the gate. What and who are the Magnificent Seven? And Scott, I'm going to start with you. And what do you see coming because of their power?
Well, the Magnificent Seven refers to 7 of the most powerful companies on the planet right now. And I just had that list here a second ago. It includes, Britt, do you recall the players on that?
Yeah, so you got Tesla, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, Google, called Alphabet now.
Yeah,
Meta,
NVIDIA.
Yeah.
NVIDIA.
Yeah, what was special about that list, obviously, and they're having record profits right now, and they're rolling in their reporting on Wall Street right now. So it's very visible what they're doing. But all of these invested very heavily in infrastructure. I just think of the billions and billions of dollars of investment that these are capable of doing. And before the program began, John mentioned that these companies have amassed a massive, kind of like a wallet full of cash, and they're spending that cash right now in acquisitions for the technology pieces that they do not yet completely control. And that's a frightening thing. It's good for the entrepreneurs and investors that are in those companies, but it is a bad sign that there's further tech consolidation, because as we all know, these are the companies that are the tech oligarchies, and they're highly controlled by, let's say, unfavorable, resources to the Christian worldview, biblical worldview. So that's who they are and why it's important.
Okay. Britt, what are your thoughts on that? And I'm going to take it a step further. You see this mass amounts of power, mass amounts of money at a time that the tech giants are also having mass layoffs, which we'll get to that in a little bit too. But I look at the 10 kings of Revelation chapter 7, also Daniel 2, Daniel chapter 7. Do you see something like this developing into the 10 kings? Now, this is just the Magnificent Seven, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that ultimately the technologies that they're working on are going to be controlled, and the concern that we should have, and that control is coming from states, because states still control the police power. And ultimately, they're working with these companies to create the very things that you opened talking about in that article you were reading. But I take a little bit of a different take on this. When I think of the Magnificent Seven, I think of how much of the stock market is dependent on those 7 companies. Now many people have piled into them. And there was something back in the early 1970s called the Nifty 50. And they were the 50 blue chip stocks that everybody had to own. And now we had this Magnificent Seven. And you look at the rest of the market, when you look at the S&P 500, well, those 7 companies account for all of the gain the last few years. And so if you start to see earnings go down in these companies, or you see a sell-off, it's going to cause a stock market crash, because there's not a breadth across a number of companies as we've had in the past. That's not indicative of a strong market. It's indicative of a sick market. That's what we saw in the 1970s when the Nifty 50 failed. We had essentially a crash back then. Most people don't think of the 1970s as a stock market crash, but the beginning of the decade to the end, it declined about 36% in the S&P 500. But when you think of the inflation we had in the 70s, that the cost of a house went up, doubled, the cost of food doubled, cost of a barrel of oil went up 8-fold. You really had a crash akin to 1929 in many ways in terms of your purchasing power if you're invested in the stock market. So I think this all plays into coming crash we're going to see, and the technologies that these companies are going to help the governments roll out in order to drive people into central bank digital currencies.
Excellent.
I almost see this as I do personally believe that there is some logic that says that these guys play a role in handing the keys to the Antichrist at some point. These are the without these companies, and especially the tech companies, Microsoft and Apple and others, NVIDIA, OpenAI, the manifestation of godlike powers to the Antichrist can't be done. And I think that as I try to imagine it, I'm not sure that they're all and I think the context of this is the 10 kings, right? And I think some of those are probably quasi, governmental agencies already. They're already actors, global actors, able to do things that regulatory wise the other governments cannot do yet. So I think they play a very critical role in anything that these guys do, such as, and I'm sure we'll get to this later, but Sam Altman at OpenAI investing massively in chips and infrastructure right now is another example of how pervasive that power base is right now.
Well, would it be safe to also say that the government has, the military, has its hands in these organizations? DARPA's known to be in the development of Google and Facebook, from everything that I read. And when I look at it from that angle, in a sense, you could say that tech companies they operate in a way that can be used as like a military arm against the people, which I think is what the concern is. If I'm wrong, you just step in here and say you don't know what you're talking about. But if you're not going to say that, I'm just going to move on to John and ask John, what are your thoughts?
Well, Tom, these companies are very large. Where the Magnificent Seven came from was a CNBC article that came out the other day, and Deutsche Bank and other analysts were saying that if these seven companies that we mentioned combined, they would be the second largest stock exchange in the world just on their own. They have tremendous cash. I was listening to an investment advice thing yesterday on AI and technology, and Microsoft and Apple have well in excess of $300 billion of cash on hand. That gives them the ability to do a lot of things with that. So when we talk about this in terms of end times Bible prophecy, though, we're always talking about what's this final big beast empire in the conglomeration of 10 kings, and a little horn rises up and takes over 3, and what's the timing of that? And then we also have, and I see we always have some questions about this end times Babylon. What is that? Where is that? Which I think is still an open question. Everybody's got their favorite thing they want to pound on with their little hammer, but I don't think we know that yet. But I think, in fact, I just saw a video with J.B. Hickson and Mondo Gonzalez on Prophecy Watchers or J.B. Hickson's channel. I don't remember where it was. Might be on both of them for that matter. And they were talking about it. And I think Mondo has done a lot of work on thinking through, are some of these tech companies one of these 10 kings that arise up at the end, because they're so controlling, they're so big, and the numbers are enormous. If you had invested $10,000 in NVIDIA 7 or 8 years ago, you would be a billionaire today if you hadn't sold your stock. So, and they just announced record profits today. And they were a game chip, they were for gaming and graphics, for video graphics, but they saw what was coming with AI. So the companies are big, they're very controlling, and I just think they're going to grow in importance. And so then when we kind of port that over to this end times Babylon beast empire, and we know that this Babylon is destroyed, the question becomes, I think the critical question in identifying Babylon is, when is it destroyed in this last period of human history? I think that's an important question to answer.
I'd like to come back to that in just a few more minutes, but I'm curious.
That much time, Tom.
Pardon me?
Time's getting short. I mean, if we have that much time.
I would like to come back to it because it's going to play in here in a few more minutes when we get further down this too with Babylon. But you guys had all mentioned AGI. Brits, what is AGI?
Well, it's stands for Artificial General Intelligence, and basically it's this idea that computers will be able to mimic the human brain. And so the goal of artificial intelligence in many cases, what many people are working toward, is to create that artificial general intelligence. And back in 2000,
just the next step.
Yeah, so back in 2006, I believe it was, Ray Kurzweil, who's an inventor, he works at Google, he's a technology forecaster. He predicted that by the year 2029, $1,000 worth of computing power would be equal to the human brain. And if that's true, then you think about what John just said of these companies sitting on $300 billion in cash. They could essentially employ 300 million, the equivalent of 300 million human beings who could work day and night, never have to take a vacation day, never get sick. And what would they be able to create with that? And I think that's where we get into this exponential change and the ability of people to grasp that and how quickly all of this is coming. Because some people will say, well, there's two ways of looking at this. One is, a year ago, ChatGPT was all the rage and it was going to change the world. Well, I don't really notice much yet. The other way of looking at it is to think of how our minds are incapable of really grasping exponential change. So if you think of, for instance, if a technology doubled every year, then within 10 years, it would increase 1,000-fold. But half of that 1,000-fold increase comes in the final year. And over 87% of that increase comes in the final 3 years. But then you look at the first 3 years of that 10-year period, and it's less than 1% of that 1,000-fold change. So when you're on an exponential curve like that, in the early parts of that, it seems like nothing's really changing. And then all of a sudden, everything changes. I mean, think about for thousands of years, people said, well, manned control of flight, that's impossible. And then the Wright brothers flew a glider for less than 2 minutes. 66 years later, we're on the moon. That's exponential change. And we see that all the time with product adoption, where a few people will adopt a new product, and then it seems like overnight, everybody has it. So we're going to see that same type of impact come suddenly to a lot of people that maybe they're hearing about these things and they think, oh, this is way off into the future, because you tend to think incrementally that, each year will bring the same amount of change, but it's really rapidly increasing. And at the end, it's going to be moving so fast, most people won't be able to keep up.
I would say Bible prophecy itself is kind of advancing like that. John, isn't it, what's that saying about bankruptcy? How'd you go bankrupt? It was very slowly and then suddenly.
You go gradually, then suddenly. Let me give you an example. This is one that I like to use when I talk about exponential growth, is how long would it take to fill Yankee Stadium with water if you went out and you, for example, here's a picture of Yankee Stadium. So if you went out with let's say it was completely watertight, and you went out with an eyedropper at second base, and every minute you're going to do a drop of water, and it's not going to evaporate or anything like that. So 1 minute you do 1 drop, 2 minutes you do 2 drops, then 4 drops. And the question is, how long does it take before Yankee Stadium overflows with water, doubling it every minute? And the answer is less than 50 minutes. And remember, 1 minute before it overflows, it's just a little over half full. So that's an example that it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but I do think that that's an example of this gradually, then suddenly. That was a quote from a Hemingway novel. How did you go bankrupt? 2 ways. I went gradually, then suddenly. And I think that that's a picture of how this, not that Hemingway's scripture, but I think it's a concept that we see. When Jesus fulfilled prophecy at his first coming, 60%, actually 59% of them were fulfilled in the last week. If that's the pattern, and Jewish prophecy is pattern, then that pattern will repeat, and most of the prophecies are going to be filled very quickly and in very short order at the end. And I think we see it ramping up to that in a world where the statistic I heard yesterday, and I think this is true, in the last 2 years, 90% of all of the information that exists has been created, data and information, in the last 2 years in human history. So
that's
yeah, and I mean, you look at all these giant server farms, and they're just racks of computers that store bits and bytes of information. And there's the infrastructure is everywhere. These giant server farms, and the tech companies aren't necessarily centered in the US. That's probably their biggest markets, but they're building these things all over the world. And there's some limitations. They're building a big Intel plant here, but because of they're sort of reaching, and I think Brett has talked about molecular machines, but in terms of silicon chips, they're sort of reaching the ability to make them any smaller. So what NVIDIA has done is they've made the chips bigger and configured them in a different way. So the chip they rolled out in, I think, May or June has what their own website says, it has at least 200 billion transistors on each chip. It's about the size of an iPad. And then they put 200, 250 of those in an array, and the amount of information that they can process is just, it's mind-boggling. And we're just at the start of this. Remember, ChatGPT is sort of baby steps. Right now.
Scott, let me ask you about that, because you had also commented before about Moore's law. That's Gordon Moore, if I remember correctly, same one. My dad actually worked with Gordon Moore back in the early 1960s, and that has to do with transistors and just some conversations I remember having with my dad. My dad was, a tech guy in the early days. I was not, and but your thoughts on all of this, because a couple of things is that you've developed the Rapture Kit. God's given you that ability to foresee certain things that will be able to be used after the rapture takes place. But we see everything happening rapidly, and everything that's just been described by both Britt and John does define Bible prophecy in the time frame of birth pangs. This is going to happen suddenly. It's going to increase in frequency and intensity, and it is much greater than I think we really imagine, because even right now, we look at everything is happening fast. It's not just technology, but every single place we look when it comes to the signs of the times are happening at an incredible rate, but way faster than they ever were before. So, but with this, when you look at technology, what are your thoughts on these things and the rapid development of everything?
Well, first of all, I am a tech guy for real. I spent most of my career, in technology in various positions as a technical co-founder, principal data architect, chief technology officer, VP of technology, all of that stuff, right? So I watch it very, very carefully. And in the past few months, as you know, especially since the last conference, Tom, in San Marcos there, I did a presentation on the Mark of the Beast technology. What does the technology look like? And I'm literally seeing all of that stuff fall into place. And the thing that I wanted to specifically mention about that is I don't know that any Bible prophecy guy could have seen, even 5 years ago, what we're seeing today. I think we, at the beginning of all of this, the last few years here, if you get the context of that, we kept asking early on, we would say, why are we still here? Well, I think the reason why we're still here is because the Lord's not done with us yet. And he's unfolding more and more that will impact the church and awake the bride and, continue to stage set the things that he himself has permitted to happen. And that is sobering to realize that none of this is taking God by surprise. And getting back to Britt's comment on AGI right now, the artificial general intelligence, the goal is to get to artificial super intelligence, which is a step beyond just general intelligence. So general intelligence means that it can solve most problems, but still is short of how humans think and what they can accomplish, mentally. The super intelligent part of it, I think, is still, a little ways out there, but they have realized they are ahead of schedule now. OpenAI, I just saw an interesting commentary on this from another AI analyst saying that, OpenAI is, not only did it shatter people's disbelief that AGI was possible, because they were mocked initially. What are you talking about? You can't do that. And sure enough, they are delivering step by step, and they're actually ahead of the plan right now. And we see unbelievable advancements coming out of that group. And that OpenAI is helping to spur massive amounts of innovation in the ecosystem surrounding that. And one of the things that I continue to look at is the pace of it is not going to stop. I've been personally thinking through Why is it that we keep getting, needing to acknowledge end user license agreements all the time? Our terms and services have been updated. It's like every week the same vendor is doing this. You come into your office in the morning, you find out that your computer rebooted overnight. Why? It seems like we're rebooting computers every, less than every week cadence right now. It used to be every month. And so I just think they're pushing, basically beast system stuff into place everywhere. Mobile phones, Apple, their computer chips, half of their computer chips that are in the iPhone are intended for general computing, like handling web browsers and conversations and phone calls and text messages. But there's another half of it that's a lot more secretive that has to do with AI based scale. And so everybody's phone, the Google phones as well, the Android phones, they have a massive compute power in them. So long story short, the amount of innovation, it is happening so fast, and the competitive advantage that is announced in the moment of a press release or a demo or another show is held less than a few days in some cases. It is literally stunning to see what they are doing. And this is coming from a tech guy.
So, Scott, you had written also about when you look at some of these things they're developing, and we have man's plans. Men say, hey, by 2030, we're going to develop this. Now we're hearing by 2025, and what you're saying with OpenAI and the astounding speed that things are developing. But the reality of it is, Britt, with this thought, still, we aren't going to go anywhere if God doesn't decide that men are going to get there by 2030 or 2025 or whatever that window is. And also, what's the concern of a person who is a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ with some of these things? Some people are really worried about it that are believers, and some people are saying, I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to be raptured. What are some of your thoughts on that?
That's for me.
Yeah, sorry, Brett.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that if you know Christ, if you have faith in Jesus Christ, you have nothing to fear. We're not meant to fear this world. But I do hear a lot of people think, and have said for years, I've gotten this feedback, we'll be gone before this happens or that happens. And we have no such guarantee. Terrible things have happened throughout history to Christians that came before us in other countries. And so there's no guarantee that we won't have to deal with some of the terrible things that are coming before the tribulation period. And I want to go back to John's illustration of the Yankee Stadium, because I think that's a perfect illustration of the world. Let's pretend the world is the stadium. If 50 minutes, that stadium's overflowing with water. At 46 minutes, most all of the people who are spectators in the stands have no clue that they're about to drown, because they don't understand what's happening. And that's the world we're living in right now. When we talk about a lot of these things that are coming, people think that's so far off. It'll be 100 years from now before any of this stuff is done. And they're thinking in linear terms, that the next year will be like the last year, and not that exponential change is taking place. And what that means.
Normalcy bias.
Correct. Yes, and it's gonna come suddenly upon people, and they are gonna, because they can't grasp what's happening.
10 years ago, I did a talk at a prophecy conference in South Carolina, and I used a video at the end of the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami that occurred in the Indian Ocean. And I used that as a picture of what's coming, because the very unusual thing that happened in that tsunami is that the water in the bays in Thailand drained out of the bay. So people were walking out in the bay. Oh, look at the coral reef. We can walk up to it now, and we don't have to get in a boat and snorkel. And then some people noticed this big white cap across the entire horizon. And then somebody said, well, is that a tsunami? And you can hear the people in the background saying, oh, no, that's not a tsunami. And then about 30 seconds or less than a minute goes by and they're going, tsunami. And what you see is the locals knew what was coming and they turned and headed for higher ground. And these other people standing out there in the bay were washed away. And I think that's a picture of how this thing is going to come in the end times. There's a buildup, and then it just washes over everything. So I think Brett picked up on that perfectly in the Yankee Stadium analogy. It happens, and everybody, oh, you know, that's nothing. Don't worry about it. They never, you know, it never comes here. It never, you know, it's not going to happen, and it does. And so, you know, the answer I said to the question is, well, what's going to be fulfilled or what's going to happen in the world before Jesus returns? And the answer is, well, at least everything that you've seen so far. And then I think, and then some. Because the world really changed 4 years ago. This month was when a lot of restrictions and lockdowns for the Charlie Vector thing were coming into place. And the world's not changed. And every year I start off my first update with, how far are we going to get this year before we long for the good old days of, you know, 10 days ago? And each year it gets a little bit shorter. And boy, we'd love to go back to 2020. You know, or 2019, but that's not, I just don't think that's happening. But you know, the Lord is faithful and he will protect us. And we ought to always be concerned about whatever we do and how we react to all of these things, we act to his glory.
Right, thank you. By the way, Zach from Wretched Watchman and Pete Garcia are both in they're both in the chat right now. So shout out to you guys. And in fact, you guys probably have some great questions. Feel free to text me anything you want me to ask any of these fine young men. And so you guys have mentioned disease X in the technology discussion before we, you know, over the last few days. And we keep hearing about disease X. Scott, what's the connection that in your minds you look at disease X and technology? Is it control or is it lockdowns, or what's your thought behind it?
So that's actually more complex question than I think we realize right now. I think with the other thing that happened 4 years ago, it looked relatively, you know, dangerous. It was dangerous. I still remember that moment when the airplanes hit the, you know, World Trade Center. I remember that moment. I also remember the moment where I saw people, just patients, falling over, collapsed, and dead in the hallway of Chinese hospitals. I do remember that. Another one of those moments, you just can't unsee that. And so it was pretty frightening back then. Well, I think that one of the things that I just saw again for reference is Bill and Melinda Gates and their forecasting of the next pandemic. Okay. And the thing that I just detest, honestly, is the evil glee that I witnessed in their faces as Bill says, right at the camera, you know, the next one will be much worse. And Melinda Gates had this smile that I just can't get that out of my head right now. And it's just this unbelievable evil. We know what's coming, probably because they're, you know, in control of it. And they said the next one will be much worse. Well, let's get to disease X. I follow John Campbell in the UK for this type of information. He's very good, very reliable, very, very well respected. And so I've been listening to his take on disease X too. And it's supposed to be 20 times as lethal as the first one that we had a few years ago. And that is pretty sobering to hear that. And I think the bottom line that the elites and the others that are planning these things want is control. Because remember, I think there was this curve where we let go of so many of our rights, and we basically yielded to fear in so many ways. And I think that we've been toughened up a little bit through that. I think there's the church has more discernment right now, thankfully. But I also hear this bravado, in a false bravado, I would basically say, which is, I'm not doing that again, as in, taking that medication. And as though, we can prevail through this. And yet you hear 20 times the lethality. And you have to imagine the vice grip that is going to be put on the world. And their goal is population reduction. There's no other way to think through these things except to realize they just want to take out people. And I think that this lines up perfectly with Bible prophecy. Just look at the 4 horsemen and all that happens there. So it is absolutely in the correct trajectory for what we anticipate that Scripture reveals to us is going to occur as soon as we're gone. But it's bad. I mean, disease X, I think they'll say, well, you could say that you're going to resist and won't do this. You won't follow our edict, but we know better. And it's that evil side of it that I just, I remember Bill when he was a normal human being back in the tech world.
I didn't know he was ever normal, but
he was a smart guy. But I didn't understand.
He's from the tech industry, so he's used to nerds,
Oh,
so.
okay.
Yeah, thank you, God. Gracefully said, brother. So yeah, he used to be someone I admired and looked up to, and oh my goodness, he's probably one of the most evil men in the world right now. So I just think that disease X is very threatening, and they're doing this to broadcast again. I think there's a mercy involved in the Lord allowing these evil people to communicate ahead of time what they're going to do.
They definitely telegraph.
It definitely helps the church to get ready and to be prepared.
It should alert the church. John, this Pete Garcia has a question for you, and it's right along the lines of what Scott was talking about. But first of all, before I get to the question from Pete also texted and said there's solar flare R3 caused an outage today, first in modern history. I woke up this morning hearing that something happened to Verizon, AT&T, and from coast to coast. Is that what that's a reference to?
Yeah. There was a big outage in the cell phone companies. I have AT&T. It's like everybody at the big tech companies knows exactly who I'm with and probably who I call and talk to and text with anyway, since they're sucking up all my data all the time. But yeah, there's some thinking that this big solar flare today caused that. And so there was a huge outage. Now, we didn't have it here in Ohio, but I will tell you, about a week ago, I had some things that I was trying to do, and my internet went down. So I go to my cell phone, and AT&T is down. And I'm kind of stuck, because the internet is our phone. It was Super Bowl Sunday. And amazingly, the cable company sent 2 guys out here during the Super Bowl game to get my internet back up on Sunday evening of the Super Bowl. So I guess they figure they have a nice mark here in me paying those big monthly bills that they charge or something. But this is a big deal. I mean, because we are entering a period of activity of the sun. And here in Ohio, in about 45 days, Monday, April the 8th, where I live, will be in the path of totality of an eclipse. And it'll be the only one the next one will be 2099, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be here for that one. But
unless you get augmented by Yuval Noah Harari stuff.
Yeah, he may be here. Well, I will be around in some fashion in 2099. I'm just, I'm pretty sure my location won't be Ohio. But
that's good.
It'll be something. It won't be known as Ohio in those days.
It could be the Ohio of the Millennial Kingdom, John.
There you go.
It's
right. I'm sure. I think I want Scotland though. If I get a place to rule and reign, I'll take Scotland.
So along these lines, along what both you said and Scott had mentioned, So Pete just threw this out there. Do you see one big black swan event or a bunch of little ones strategically timed to disrupt the upcoming election? Any of you could answer that.
I'll answer that. Yes. Yeah, I think, and that's one of the questions you have coming up about the Tucker Carlson interview. So if you want to get to that now, we can do that.
Well, I'll tell you,
because they're related.
Let me get to. All right, we'll just go there. So Pete, your question's getting wrapped into this other one I have. So John, you stated that Tucker Carlson recently posted a video on censorship and said it's probably the most important one he's ever done. And that's very interesting in light of he just interviewed Putin recently too.
Yeah, it came on the heels of his interview of Putin, where I thought Putin is a master. I mean, Putin is like the biggest crime boss on the planet and the master liar deceiver. And he's going to win the war in Ukraine, by the way. But be that as it may, he played Tucker, and he even said it afterwards. I think I got away with a lot. The guy never asked me a tough question, and he didn't. I had a whole list of them that I would like to ask, but so then Tucker went to the World Governments Summit. It's no longer the World Government Summit. I think they were being too revealing with the name, so now it's called World Governments Summit. I mean, that makes everybody feel better, right? And at the and Tucker, he gave what I would consider to be a very pathetic answer on the Middle East situation. But then he came out with a very good video. I think it was the best interview he ever did. He did one with RFK Jr. that I thought was pretty good when he was still at Fox. But this one with Mike Benz Cyber, if you want to follow him on X or Twitter. And he talked about how all of these government agencies have been sort of dragooned in with the tech companies. So the government can't restrict speech. So they've outsourced it to all these tech companies. There's a guy at Stopping Hate or something like that. And it's just one guy. And he's essentially shut down monetization for Glenn Beck on his YouTube videos, because Glenn was going against the narrative on climate change. One guy. And the way he's doing it, if you go to his website, I think it's stoppinghate.com or .org, he says, I did it using AI. And what you're seeing is there's a company from the UK called Moonshot that was brought in by the Canadian government, and then and what they're doing is they're evaluating text and information that's being shared on social media, and they're taking it down, they're throttling it and that type of thing. So you have seen nothing yet till you see what's going to happen in this election. So go watch the Tucker interview. It's an hour, 4 minutes long, and follow Mike Benz. You will get a lot of information about what's going on and what's happening. And I will tell you, it is frightening, because I don't know what's going to happen in this next election. I have a pretty good idea that a lot of it's not going to be good. I predict that. I just think
Britt, I'll give you a chance in a minute, Britt.
So what they did was they gave the technology companies, and so they come out and they say, we're doing this to protect democracy. But what they really mean by that is we're protecting the democratic institutions that we now have control of, like courts or federal agencies or things like that. In Israel, the big battle's been over the Supreme Court. And you can argue the merits about it. Clearly, everybody agrees they need to reform the Supreme Court. But because it's proposed by people on the, quote, far right, we can't, it's tearing apart Israeli society. And what it is, and by the way, so the democratically elected government of Israel puts in place a democratically passed in the Knesset law to restrict the powers of the judiciary And what's the protest? Those crazy far-right people are destroying democracy by acting in a democratic fashion. It's insane, because what they really want to protect is the institution that they control and does their bidding. It's the same thing here in the United States, and you're going to see a lot of it over the next 6 months. 9 months until this election takes place.
Leading up to the election. Britt, you've been quiet for a little while. So as we look at censorship, rest of 2024, obviously we have the election coming. The question from Pete, do we see a black swan event? Everything that John just said, I look at 2024, you've talked about censorship many times before, and we have an election. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think certainly they're going to do everything they can to control the outcome of the election. But again, I maybe have a different point of view in saying that I think the plans will unfold regardless of who wins an election or doesn't win an election. So we know our monetary system is coming to its mathematical end. And just as we saw the plan might be to have certain people win the election, and then everything falls apart afterwards and gets blamed on them. So I don't know necessarily what plans are going to unfold, but I don't think it's the next year, 2 years, 5 years. Intend to do that. That's usually what they say right before they do something. We didn't intend to do that, and then they do it.
Seems like it's just a really good idea, Look, the Bank of International Settlements, which is sort of the central bank of central banks. What's that guy's name? Britt, Augustus Carstens or something like that, who's always going to these conferences and stuff and talk about, well, we'll use this for control. And then Christine Lagarde, is she the European Central Bank head? Remember that really weird thing she did with the 7 thing in the New York conference years ago? I mean, they're very bizarre people. So, Tom, what you said about the cameras, I noticed this in Scotland as I was driving around, and as I came from the far north back down sort of towards Glasgow and Stirling, there were cameras all over the place, and I became more concerned about the cameras than what was going on the road ahead of me, which didn't seem to be safe. But they do this thing. They monitor your average speed, and I watch guys. They would drive like 90 miles an hour, then they would hit a camera thing, and they would drive 50. Because that averaged out then to 70. So they knew how to game the system. But I paid it I was in a little town called Kane, spending the night. I went to get some stuff at a big, I think it's called ASDA store, and big, sort of like a Walmart type thing. It had like a whole row of shelves of canned fish. That was the unusual thing. But I bought stuff. I checked out, and I was using my American Express Gold card. It took a picture of me at the checkout, and somebody had to come over and approve it. I started to walk out before I got to the door, I remembered, I forgot to get some water. So I went back, and I come up to the thing to pay the checkout, and my picture pops up on the screen that had just been taken. I'm in the system already, and it's facial recognition. It's kind of freaky. But even with cash, you're going to get tracked. If you go to Costco and you have to show your card and you pay cash, you can go to your Costco app and you can see everything that you bought, even with cash. So you can't hide anything there. So it's all being tracked, and they'll control the point of sale even for cash. And I don't know how you're going to get around the system. That's one of the things. So I think it's coming. I think it'll be far reaching, and it's what, Tom, was it your interview with Patrick Wood where he said, at the middle of the tribulation, the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist and false prophet don't get together for a meeting then and say, hey, how are we going to crowdfund this Mark of the Beast thing? You know, they're not going to do that. They're just going to say, okay, we can flip the switch of the stuff that's already in place and take it over. And I think that's how it's going to work.
Well, speaking of crowdfunding, right? We look at, was it Sam Altman, who's now raising $7 trillion. There's massive expenses that are involved in the AI technology and the direction everything is going. Massive amounts of energy too. I read a report just recently that said something like 25% of the energy that's produced in the United States is going to be needed to run the AI systems in just by 2025. How is that even possible, Scott? How's that possible?
Well, first of all, energy is definitely an issue until, unless you continue to miniaturize, because that'll reduce electrical consumption in chips. But the fact of the matter is that they'll find a way to do it. And each of these data centers that are being built right now, not only are connected to the grid, but they have very sophisticated backup energy systems, because technically those systems should never go down. That's the whole point of a data center, and it's redundant power supply and it's redundant air conditioning, et cetera. So it's one of the pieces that they need it's one of the factors that they look at before they make an investment in a data center is, can we get power reliably, and is it cost effective for us? So, but I think miniaturization and new material science, there's some recent news. I haven't had a chance to fully research this yet, but that is saying that a material science breakthrough on batteries is just around the corner. And I'd like to just throw in one of the things that I just absolutely was fascinated by recently. I saw an article about how AI is beginning to connect to a robot, and that robot actually has a kind of like a command and control area full of material components and different chemicals and different resources. And what it's doing 24/7 nonstop is it's experimenting with new materials, and it's doing it completely autonomously at the control of the AI. And it's learning and getting more and more sophisticated. And there's a shot of one of the data centers right there.
That's New Albany, Ohio, about 15 minutes from my house.
The idea here is what's really mind-blowing is, what does this mean? And we've always been concerned about AI starting to have a presence in the real world, and it does that with robots. Okay, so when they could do that, you see phenomenal things. So the example with material science is, just to give you one use case, was that human beings have created 20,000, let's call it, units of new material research, and computationally intensive algorithms have created, I would say 40,000 of these units, but the AI assisted one has done 420,000 units. So the AI part of it, Tom, is astronomically more efficient and better at what is happening. And it's all it's doing is brute force experimentation and learning. But if you do that enough and you keep experimenting, you start to get those neural networks to understand the best and most optimal way of doing something. And the breakthroughs that are coming, it is supposed to be absolutely jaw-dropping. Of course, all of it's very secret right now.
As we watch all of the rapid development of all of these things going on, Scott, can you tell me, what is Gemma? You talked a little bit about Gemma. Gemma, is that what it is?
Yeah.
I was hooked on phonics. I learned in Catholic school when I was a kid. I only learned phonics, so it looks like Gemma to me. And so with Gemma, you wrote this, which is very interesting. Now Google just rolled out a new open model Gemma. Any kid in a garage can become a billionaire almost overnight. So What is this?
Well, and I think Britt would also have a very important perspective on this, but I think with the pace of innovation that we're seeing, one of the trends that I'm almost struggling to understand, how can they do this exactly? But they're starting to, there's a wider acceptance of making these large language models and its subsets publicly available. They're open source. And that is a staggering thing. And the leader in this, that is the most most at stake, is Meta. Meta has put their Llama engine in the open source. And what that means is that anybody, here's the illustration with the kid in the garage, anybody that wants to download effectively the billions of dollars that Meta has invested in AI and the training, and put it on their computer and start thinking and playing with it and innovating and being creative with it, that is within the reach of the average teenager nowadays. And so just like Steve Jobs and Wozniak back in the day when they were developing the Apple computer in the garage, I see an explosion of, innovation coming, which is why you'll hear financial analysts say that there is unbelievable wealth that will be created in the next few years because of this principle, is that it doesn't need a lot of investment anymore. You have an open source AI that you can take and work with, and you've got a laptop that's $1,000, and before you know it, you're able to create software. You can put it on a software as a service website, and you can start charging subscription fees.
Are you the one, or should we look for another? And Jesus, did you go back and tell John what you see? The lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. And so there's a very messianic quality, fake messianic quality to the stuff that's being developed. Scott mentioned the psychedelics that are involved, and that really squares with the pharmakia sorcery part of Revelation, that they're using these. And I mean, the board at Tesla is upset with Elon Musk, or shall I say Elon Musk's handler, because she's not, keeping him away from the magic mushrooms often enough. There's been it's been playing out in the public. So we just need to understand that all of these things are in play on the spiritual. We talk about AI and technology, but there is a spiritual side to it. I think I agree with Scott. It's not so much that there's a demon in the machine, but the machine is learning and spewing out information that it's getting from demon-inspired people, and that's where the problem comes in.
I'm going to throw some.
Can I add on to that, onto what
Yeah.
they both said, which is that, the technology is neutral. It's neither good nor evil. The wickedness, the evil, is in the human heart. There's nothing wrong with a train. There's nothing wrong with an oven. There's nothing wrong with a shower head or an assembly line. But the human heart combined all of those things into Nazi extermination camps. So technology is a tool like any other, but the wickedness is in the human heart. That's where the problem is coming from with all of this.
Yeah.